It's everyone's like 8th or 9th favorite holiday, but it's among the most expensive holidays out there. A 2015 survey found that around half the population in the UK spent some sort of money on Valentine's Day gifts like flowers, cards, and chocolates, and altogether they spent around £2 billion. In the US, the average person spends over $100 on this sort of special day, and that number trended upwards over the 2010s. Upwards of 200 million Valentine's Day cards are given out around the US, and if you include in this figure those piddly ones attached to like fun-sized Snickers bars, that number skyrockets to 1 billion Valentines. This leads to elementary school teachers being the ones who statistically receive the most Valentines throughout their life. And so, as a child of an elementary school teacher, I love the holiday because I'd always get to eat all the fancy chocolates that my mom got. Also, for some reason, she got a lot of Sonic gift cards. I definitely preferred the chocolate. But as much as I am loath to admit it, not everyone has the exact same opinions as me at all times, and there are actually some people out there who do not like this holiday. Some people don't like romance, some don't like getting the fact that they're single rubbed in their face. But the main criticism that I've seen is that people think it's way too commercialized. These critics postulate that the entire holiday is basically just about buying stuff, like it was just a scheme manufactured by Hallmark. Well, as with anything else in culture, it's complicated. So where did this holiday come from? And was it always about romance? And what's with like the hearts and chocolates and roses and stuff? To answer all this, like with just about anything in the Western canon, we're gonna start with the Romans. In the 3rd century AC, there was this guy called Saint Valentine, and he died, which you, by definition, have to do to become a saint. Not only did he die, but he was also a martyr. Before Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan in 313 that allowed some wiggle room for religious tolerance, Christians were persecuted, and preaching the ways of Christian-ing was an offense punishable by death. Our valiant hero, Mr. Saint Valentine, was caught red-handed spreading the word of the Lord, and so he was sent off to be executed. While in jail awaiting his execution, he befriended his jailer because, well, I mean, he was a saint. He was a nice guy. And so Valentine miraculously restored the sight of this jailer's blind daughter, and that was his saintly miracle. He became a saint in 496, and like many other saints, he had a feast day in his honor, since that's what the Catholics do to celebrate saints. So did Saint Valentine's feast day just start out as a holiday about romance? Well, not really. He started out as a pretty run-of-the-mill saint. No one hated him, but he wasn't making anyone's top 5 saints list. I mean, unless you were a 6th century epileptic beekeeper in Tourney, since Valentine was the patron saint of the city of Tourney and also beekeeping and also epilepsy. He was a real jack of all trades sort of saint. So did St. Valentine's feast day follow the classic Christian tradition of just gobbling up pagan holidays and reappropriating them for themselves? Maybe. There was the Roman holiday of Lupercalia, which was celebrated on February the 15th, which is, you know, a day after February 14th. That's right, I'm an engineer. This festival was sort of like a spring cleaning ceremony where rituals would be performed to ensure the health of the city in the following year, and of course, people would party and feast and whatever. It was also called Dies Februatus in honor of the goddess Juno, specifically Juno Februalis, Februata, Februa. Yes, all 4 of those names. One of the quirks of Juno was that for some reason she was in charge of many, many things. And you could tell what form she was in and what responsibilities she was assuming at any given time by looking at her last name, or the epithets being used to describe her. And no, not like a bad word describing her, but just her last name. You can kind of think about it like how Arceus changes type based on whatever plate he's holding. To make a long and honestly very confusing story short, there's Juno Regina when she's being the Queen of Rome, Juno Moneta when she's meddling in warfare, and when she's Juno Februalis Februata Februa, she's overseeing the Lupercalia festivals. There are records of Lupercalia happening since at least the 1st century BC. Specifically, Julius Caesar used a Lupercalia festival as an opportunity to air some dirty laundry he had with Mark Antony. Can't imagine why there would have been beef there. And these festivals were still happening well after pagan traditions were officially banned in Christian Rome in the late 4th century. In the late 5th century, the Pope at the time, Pope Gelasius I, wrote a letter to the emperor to complain about the, quote, vile rabble that attended the festivals. And so this festival was banned. Or it may not have been banned and the Pope never actually wrote a letter complaining about it. I don't know. The sources about this directly contradict each other. It's very confusing. Anyway, but here's the thing. Everything I just told you about this Roman holiday might not even matter when we're talking about Valentine's Day. After the references to Lupercalia in the 6th century, there's a big gap in time before any mid-February festivals allude at all to love. We don't see any record of this until like the Middle Ages. In the late 14th century, there was Chaucer, who, by the way, is my first cousin, like 18 times removed. Anyway, what he is secondarily known for is writing poetry. One poem he wrote was The Parliament of Fowls, and in this poem, there are birds wooing each other, and it happened on St. Valentine's Day. At the same time Chaucer wrote The Parliament of Fowls, there were a few other poets who also wrote specifically about the courtship of birds, and these poems took place specifically on Valentine's Day. So sometime before or during Chaucer's career, these romantic notions were getting associated with the day. We can't precisely decipher in what order these poems came out in. Chaucer might have been inspired by one of these other poets or vice versa. This is the first reference to any sort of romantic connotations associated with the day, and it didn't occur until almost 1,000 years since the last time Lupercalia was referenced. So while it isn't impossible that Valentine's Day traditions were in some way inspired by Roman mid-February fertility festivals, I mean, there also might just be a gap in the record, but it doesn't seem like that's the 100% surefire explanation. And here's another thing. Chaucer was most likely referencing a different St. Valentine's Day. Not the one who restored the site to his jailer's daughter, but the St. Valentine of Genoa. The Parliament of Fowls was written to honor the betrothal of King Richard II with Anna Bohemia, and this betrothal took place on May 2nd, 1381. And the Genoese saint has his feast day on May 3rd. The mathematicians among you might know that these days are very close to each other. So this adds just another layer of confusion. So like, how did the romantic notions get pinned onto the other St. Valentine's feast day, like the one in February? Potentially, the poets could have inspired each other to write about birds being in love on this holiday, but they didn't realize exactly which St. Valentine the other was talking about. And to be fair, in England, mid-February is about the time some birds start wooing each other and nesting. So it'd be understandable to think a poet meant that St. Valentine, or it could have been King Charles VI of France who misinterpreted the day these poets were talking about. In 1400, King Charles VI wrote the Charter of Courtly Love, and it described an elaborate soiree he hosted in Mantes-la-Jolie on February the 14th. At this party, they were doing all the sort of things you do at medieval times. Dancing, jousting, eating with your hands, you know the drill. And most notably, at this shindig, the ladies of the court held a little proto-Ask Abby meets Judge Judy sort of thing. They listened to various lovers' quarrels and issued verdicts and advice. And everyone was there, and it was the best party in the world, and everybody clapped, and actually it might not have happened at all. It might have just been a creative writing exercise the king took on as he was hunkered down waiting out the plague. No one who King Charles had on the guest list for this party had any record of actually being at Mantes-la-Jolie at the time it supposedly happened. And like, isn't that absolutely unhinged? It would be like if today Justin Trudeau issued a statement about how he threw the biggest birthday party in the world and like Beyonce and Michelle Obama and Addison Rae were all there, but like none of them were even in Canada anytime that entire year. So basically, for whatever reason, in the late 13th/early 14th century, there is solid evidence that the notion of romantic love was starting to get entangled with St. Valentine's mid-February feast day. And in general, in the literature and art of this time period, we're starting to see more romance playing important thematic roles. And the concept of romantic love was also starting to get entangled with the symbol of the heart. Starting in ballpark the 12th century, the heart started becoming a popular motif in the Christian art world as a representation of the Sacred Heart of Christ. And the Sacred Heart of Christ just represented the love he had for humankind. Personally, I prefer Civ 6, but go off, Jesus. The Sacred Heart was often depicted alongside scenes of the Passion of the Christ, which in turn was becoming a popular motif since devotions to the 5 wounds that he received while on the cross became really popular for whatever reason when crusaders were coming back to Europe. Probably because a lot of these crusaders were getting wounded since they were at war. Then artists began to reappropriate the symbol for Christ's love for humankind to represent someone's romantic love. The first time we see any sort of heart symbol being used as a sort of stand-in for romantic love is in this highly decorated S that was illuminated in the 1250s. In it, there are 2 lovers gazing at each other, and the man is kneeling, offering the lady this pine cone looking thing. Back in the day, people thought hearts were vaguely pine cone shaped, especially monks whose job it was to illustrate manuscripts and not like dissect people. But notably, the pointy bit of the pinecone heart is facing upwards as opposed to our heart symbol today where the point is downwards. And it was still drawn with the aorta on because it was supposed to depict a anatomically correct heart. Until the late 14th century, we see these hearts being handed around to lovers or Christ or whoever with their points facing up, but then we can see changes starting in the mid-14th century. 2 changes, actually. 1, the heart starts to be depicted with its point facing downwards, and 2, the non-pointy side of the heart starts to get a dent in it, and this dent gradually gets more and more pronounced. By the time the Luther Rose, which is basically just a heart with a cross in it, got designed in 1520, hearts look indistinguishable from our contemporary heart emojis. Some hearts were still depicted with the aorta here and there, but luckily that fell out of fashion. Since then, the heart has basically acted as a stand-in for both the concept of love and the anatomical heart. Okay, well, we have to address the elephant in the room, or the contraceptive in the room. You've probably heard that the heart got its shape from the now extinct silphium plant. These plants had heart-shaped fruits or seeds that the Greeks and Romans used as a contraceptive. And the Greeks and Romans imported this plant from the ancient North African city of Cyrene so much that it was critical to the city's economy, so much so that they actually stamped depictions of the plant onto their coins. So that's how we know that this plant had heart-shaped seeds or fruit. Silver coins from as early as 600 BC have been found with hearts stamped on them. But despite the plant's mythical status today as a contraceptive, it was likely traded primarily for its resin. Like truffles today, the plant couldn't really be cultivated, and it only grew in a thin patch of land in modern-day Libya. The legend goes that the Greeks and Romans were so debaucherous that they ate the plant out of existence to avoid all the unwanted consequences of their lechery, like, well, babies, but that is probably not the full truth. The climate of North Africa became more and more arid over the turn of the first millennium, and the plant just might not have been able to handle the climate change. Or it was just over-harvested because it was incredibly lucrative. Regardless, like the festival of Lupercalia and Valentine's Day, there's a huge gap of time between the heart depicted on coins in Roman times and then the romantic heart showing up in medieval art. There were some hearts that appeared in medieval heraldry, However, these hearts are said to represent the leaves of ivy and not anatomical hearts or romantic hearts. It's not impossible that an especially scholarly artist in the 14th century made the connection between the anatomical hearts they saw depicted and the fruit of the ancient silphium plant, but it seems more like the development of the romantic symbol of the heart developing to look just like the silphium plant heart was just kind of like a cultural convergent evolution. The progression of the anatomical heart to the contemporary heart symbol just seemed like it was a game of artistic telephone. Like a doctor told an artist, like, yeah, hearts are like pinecone shape, and the artist was like, okay, pinecone shape, got it, and then turned it upside down and then added a dent. Like, sometimes there just isn't a deeper meaning behind stuff, and sometimes there aren't layers upon layers of allusions and references to peel back. Sometimes people are just kind of dumb and just misremember things, and also drawing is really hard. So that's how hearts began to be associated with the notion of romantic love, and then by extension, Valentine's Day. But what about sending cards? According to the legend of Saint Valentine, before his execution, he wrote a letter to the girl whose sight he restored that he signed "Your Valentine," which, I mean, if she was blind her whole life, I don't really know when she would have learned how to read, but like, I'm not gonna sit here and criticize a saint. We start seeing Valentines being sent in the late 15th century. It might have been inspired by the legend, or the legend might have been retconned after the tradition started. Yeah, who knows? The first one we really see is from the Duke of Orleans, which he sent to his wife while he was being held hostage in the Tower of London. Very romantic. And there's some Valentines also found in the letters of the Paston family. You may not have heard of the Paston family, but you've definitely heard of something they helped scholars learn about. Their letters are used as primary sources for the War of the Roses and also for life in the early Tudor period in England. And also their letters were all written in the 15th century, so they help scholars track the great vowel shift that was happening at the time. And most importantly, they help track the traditions of Valentine's Day. By the time Shakespeare rolled around, the connotations of the holiday were probably fairly well established. In Hamlet, which he wrote in 1600, he has Ophelia wail mournfully about a lot, but also specifically about Valentine's Day. So from all of this we can infer that this was a celebrated holidays from at least the late Middle Ages. It was hard to say if it was a popular or prevalent holiday back in the day, or if it was more in the tier of like Labor Day, where you know it exists, but I mean, it's just Labor Day. It wasn't until the 19th century that the holiday really started to pick up steam. All I can say is the Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been really good for Valentine's Day, actually. Over the early 19th century, there were a couple of different developments that led to the holiday being more accessible to the people around Britain. First of all, factories were a thing now, so a whole bunch of pretty cards could be produced that were accessible to an average person to buy. And we all know how much the Victorians loved to send letters, so it's no surprise that they jumped all over these affordable greeting cards. But there was one other change that made this tradition really start taking off, and that was postal service reform. Up until 1840, it was pretty expensive to send mail throughout the British Postal Service, but then in 1840, they invented the postage stamp, which made rates more affordable. And you can see how this piece of legislation impacted sending Valentines. In 1835, around 60,000 Valentines were sent by mail, but in 1840, the number jumped up to over 400,000. So not only did this add more fuel to the tradition of sending cards on Valentine's, but it also had a couple of other consequences. One, that it was now affordable to send anonymous Valentines, and that became a fun but underutilized tradition. But being able to send anonymous Valentines had another side effect. As we know, the Victorians were a bit prudish, but in the 1840s, we suddenly see a spike in, shall we say, saucy poetry. And this was because, since people could send anonymous Valentines to each other. They were just sending a bunch of lewd poetry. Because I mean, you're not gonna send your coworker's wife a DM with your real name attached to it, but if it's just like Knuckles Lover 548 telling someone that you want to kiss them, then like you're not gonna get fired for that, you know? So since people could not only send Valentines cheaply, but they could also send anonymous Valentines, this just led to people sending each other a lot of lewd poetry. The Victorian Postal Service walked so that Snapchat could run, all I'm saying. This letter sending tradition pretty quickly took off in America too. In the 1840s, an American woman named Esther Howland received a Valentine from a British guy, specifically one of her dad's co-workers, which kinda weird, but it did give her the inspiration to start producing Valentines in America. And Esther was in a convenient position to be able to do this because her dad operated a stationery and bookshop, so with some paper lace and American spirit, Esther started selling cards all around America. In 1849, just 2 years after Esther started her business venture, there was an opinion piece published that said that Valentine's Day was quickly becoming a national holiday. So I think Hallmark needs to give Esther a big thank you. Sending letters for this holiday is a residual tradition of Victorian times, and so is giving your special someone flowers. Nowadays, over 250 million roses are produced every year for Valentine's Day in the US, and over 1/4 of all adults purchase flowers as a gift. Interestingly, while almost twice as many men buy flowers as women, the women who do buy flowers for Valentine's Day are way more likely to gift them to their mom, platonic friends, or like just for themselves. I mean, giving flowers as a gift has been a thing in cultures since like forever. In every culture, there's traditions surrounding the arrangement of flowers. You can think of like the laurel wreaths given to winners of sports in ancient Greece, and there's the practice of ikebana in Japan. By Victorian times, flowers were super popular. People sometimes wore little bouquets as fashion statements, and they called them nosegays. At this time, gay meant ornament, and nose still meant nose. So a nosegay was an ornament that appealed to the nose because flowers smell good. People would wear these bouquets to match their body stench since people back then thought bathing was unhealthy. A lot of their drinking water was contaminated with like dysentery and cholera germs, so it was actually unhealthy. So it was fairly common to wear perfume or just plain flowers to try and cover up your stench. Anyway, these nosegays became really popular to give out as gifts, and a sort of language of flowers popped up. Like you could send someone baby's breath to wish them well with their new baby, or lavender to say, I know you like purple, so here's some lavender. But here's the thing. Since the language of flowers started getting popular in the early 1800s, a whole bunch of different flower dictionaries popped up, and none of them really had a consensus on what most flowers actually meant. Something like the lily could mean purity, but also friendship and also playfulness. I mean, basically people were just making stuff up, but it was all in good fun. Some flowers did get fairly consistent meanings ascribed to them. There's the mimosa flower, and since it was known for shedding its leaves at night, most people agreed that it represented chastity. And then there's, of course, the rose, which pretty much just means love. Though, of course, all the colors mean something different. Like, why would it be easy? Why can't you just ascribe one meaning to one thing? That'd be too easy. The rose started its association with romance way back in the day. It was the flower associated with Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Exhibit A, the myth of Adonis, where Aphrodite is picked by a rose and her blood tints it red. For a little while in the West, it took a detour to represent the Virgin Mary, and it eventually, by the time of the Victorian era, came back around to representing love, and it's not really clear when or why this happened, so I have no idea. So yeah, that's where Valentine's Day comes from, and like hearts and roses and greeting cards. You know, don't you just love when you watch or read something to find out why something happened, and then all you really learn is well, it's complicated and no one really knows for sure. It's very satisfying, I know. However, a lot of the myths around the origin of Valentine's Day and the heart that I previously uncritically accepted as facts, I found out weren't true, and I love being proven wrong sometimes. But only sometimes, so don't, like, correct me. Don't do it. Anyway, so, like, what did I say the thesis of this video was? Is Valentine's Day a scam? I mean, we can't deny that the reason it got so much more popular in the 1800s is because it was a commercial success. But we also can't deny that the holiday has a rich legacy that stretches back almost 1,000 years. And if you believe that it appropriated Roman Lupercalia festivals, multiple thousand years. Saying that the holiday is overly commercialized is a totally fair criticism, but you can't say that it was whipped out of thin air by Hallmark as a cash grab. Hallmark wasn't even established until 1910, and like, if you want to blame anyone, blame Esther Howland. But if you were critical of this holiday, I hope learning its history has given you at least some sort of appreciation for it, and if you already liked it, I hope this has deepened your appreciation for it. I wasn't exactly setting out to try to convince you that the holiday is good. I mean, I was just kind of using that premise as a vehicle to explore cultural and art history. So like, if I didn't change your opinion, that's fine. Also, harvest mice don't have anything at all to do with Valentine's Day. I'm just like obsessed with the pictures of them sleeping in flowers, and I thought making just like a single rose was boring, so like I decided to add harvest mice. I know, my genius truly knows no bounds. So anyway, if you like Valentine's Day, leave a like, and if you like harvest mice, subscribe. If you don't, leave a dislike. Alright, bye.